Maybe I'm just an alien.
Didn't you say, though, somebody decided you were the city council candidate most likely to be an alien?
Yeah, there was another city council candidate that told me that, and I was like, can I quote you on my website? And he's like, yeah, if you put my name.
That's amazing.
I am seriously tempted to put it out there.
I think you should. Welcome back to Speaking Truth to Goodness. I'm one of your hosts, Patti Robrahn, and with me, as always, is Jerry Atkin, and we're thrilled to embark on Season 2 with you, where we have found our way into the evolving political landscape of Portland. This season is particularly special as we are joined by Andra Vltavín, a queer, non-binary social and climate activist running for City Council in Portland's District 4. They have connections to 350 PDX, Extinction Rebellion PDX, the Democratic Socialists of America, and Portland Mutual Aid Network. Their focus is one of regenerative work for the community in Portland. Andra joins Jerry and I as our guest host and will introduce us to 4 other transformative candidates shaping the future of the city. In this, our opening episode, we explore Andra's journey through activism, their commitment to climate action, and how they envision leveraging City Council to foster a regenerative, inclusive community. As we proceed, Andra will bring on Durrell Kinsey Bey, a mayoral candidate, and 3 fellow City Council candidates, Timur Ender from District 1, Chris Flanary from District 3, and Jennifer Park of District 2. Each guest brings a unique perspective on how to navigate and influence the new ranked choice voting system and charter reform aimed at making Portland's City Council more reflective of its diverse populace. We're committed to uncovering the goodness in rising leaders and discussing the tough choices they make to better our world in the face of overwhelming odds. But most of all, this is a space where candidates can show you who they truly are. They have time and space to share with you exactly what they want you to know about them. This is not just a soundbite or a clip. You deserve to know what these candidates will prioritize, what drives them forward, and I believe throughout the discussions of Season 2, you will truly connect with them. Join us as we navigate this crucial moment in Portland's history, aiming to connect you, our listeners, with the real, local stories and strategies that inspire change. Remember to engage with us by liking, commenting, subscribing, and following on Instagram. Your interaction helps us reach more listeners and build a community dedicated to transformative action. Here it is.
Here we are in our studio in my front room high above Southeast 105th Street.
I love it so much.
The skaters are down below. No, wait. In the spirit of the podcast, who you are is an important part of the story. It's not just
Agreed.
What you believe, what you want to do.
Right.
But it's so I did a talking about my life entitled "How I Got This Way." Right. So part of the story is how you got this way,
Right.
which will be an extraordinary story. Okay, I'm through interrupting now.
You're good? You're good?
Yep.
I guess my first question to you is, what is it about what's happening in this year's City Council race that made you decide it was time to put yourself into it?
Yeah, so there's a wonderful confluence of things going on. Honestly, I decided to get into the race well before I knew about all of the transitions in the government going on, which is really interesting. So mostly my path to running for office has been the fact that I've been involved in climate activism, and I've heard so many of the climate activists in the city be frustrated by the decisions of the city council, and most of our actions have been, please tell city council to do X, Y, and Z for the climate, with almost no recognition and even some betrayals that have happened that I can definitely talk about as well. And so seeing that, hearing that, I was devastated, and I'm like, okay, we clearly need to get climate activists on city council. And I think I even went to documentary showing called Once a Braided River, and the panelists after that showing said something like, hey, if anyone wants to run for city council, all of the seats are open. And I wasn't sure if they were joking, but I was really interested, and I did email the organizers. I didn't hear back from anybody, but I was like, okay, but I feel like there's something here. And so in looking more into it, I learned about all of the transition going on. So we're going from 4 city commissioners to 12, which is already a big jump in representation. We've split the city into 4 distinct districts. So each district will have 3 councilors to represent them specifically, whereas the 4 previous city commissioners were citywide. So they could come from any place, and often they were coming from the west side. And so there's not as much east side representation historically.
So there has never been a city councilor from east of 82nd Avenue.
Whoa. That's a lot of the city.
Yeah.
Yes. Unrepresented. And I joked that on the maps beyond 82nd Avenue it says, terra incognita, here be monsters. Right? It's like, it says this part of the city doesn't exist.
Well, Jerry, 10 years ago when I moved to town, I heard from my neighbors, oh, it's called Felony Flats out there.
Well, that's Lent specifically, yeah.
Yikes. I mean, right. Yeah, there's a
On the
assumption?
sidebar, it was the highest crime rate in the city, though everyone believed it was Northeast and North Portland. It was not. Yeah, and it's Felony Flats, some because a lot of recidivists coming out of jail came to live in this neighborhood. It became sort of a catchment basin. So it needs some loving attention. Go away. No, wait, it doesn't work that way. What did I miss?
Well, I think that when you're talking about the recidivism and the felony flats, so to speak, I think it brings in the social activism aspect of all of this. That you know, we've had historic redlining, we've had really discriminatory policies around race, and that's part of why we need greater representation. And also to kind of continue answering that question as well that you asked. Ranked choice voting is also happening this year for the first time in Portland, which is so exciting. And I think it's radically going to change how we're experiencing the voting process. And there's a lot of money going into educating voters on how to do this properly so that their votes will count. And we get to choose, for the city council race specifically, you get to choose your top 6. So, and your first vote, your first choice will probably get your vote unless for whatever reason they either are the majority candidate or they're eliminated as the results come in. So basically what happens is if your candidate is a big favorite, once they get 25% of the vote plus 1, then all of the rest of the votes get split evenly among those people's second choice candidates. And then if no one gets at least 25% of the vote, then the person with the least amount of votes in the whole race gets eliminated and their votes get redistributed among the other candidates until we have 3 clear winners. And so the situation means that when we have 3 clear winners, most people will get multiple people that they voted for, or that there will be a lot more representation. There will be a lot more relationship between what you wanted and what you get. So
that's a good definition of what representation means. Thank you.
Yeah. And so the education piece is really important because I recently learned that when Maine instituted ranked choice voting, they did have to throw out a lot of ballots just because people hadn't filled them out correctly. And even the people who did fill them out correctly still only voted for one candidate. And so it's huge that the charter reform included a massive budget for voter education so that we can help people understand these new changes and move forward.
So where is that education piece found for people who are kind of just tuning into this idea that, oh, this is a whole new world this year in our elections, is there a website or PSAs or what's that method like right now?
So I think it's just portland.gov. You can get a lot of information there. I don't have the exact URLs, but the election office is doing a lot of the education, and I know that a lot of it is trying to center LGBTQ and BIPOC communities especially, and I know there's some pushes toward getting those educational materials into retirement communities as well. And then there's also public grants. I think the process may have just closed for that, but you can apply as an organization for a public grant to do some of the voter education. And then in the candidate education sessions that they've been doing, they're really saying, like, part of your role in running for office is educating your voters. That is your job right now.
Okay.
And so some of that's falling on us, which I think is good. Like, that's what we should be doing. We should be a resource to our community members.
You know, I was thinking we have town halls twice a month, and it would be great to have someone who understood this and was articulate.
Oh, you're saying you have town halls here in your retirement community. Yeah.
And it's going to be very difficult. I mean, for an older population, I'm kind of like in the median at 83. I mean, I'm a youngster. They call me youngster. I go outside and they say, hey, old, never mind. I'll take what they call you. But I feel like I get very frustrated, actually, with people here. They put out written material and they say, well, we communicated. No, you put out written material. Two things. Someone has to read it, and then they have to remember it, which means you have to repeat it more than once.
That's true.
And if it's as complicated as this is, and it is complicated, it's going to take people who actually have some skill in communicating this information out there. So I don't know if there'll be a group that emerges specifically to do that, but I really believe every retirement community, they will be bewildered, and there will be people who use their bewilderment to undermine the process, because there are people who do not want this to work.
Yeah.
Boy, that's true enough.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I'm excited by that. I mean, I just feel like we're, as older people, kind of kicked to the curb, ignored. League of Women Voters is nice to us and brings us information and so on, but it's like, and I think people buy into the fact that we're not socially useful anymore because no one comes to them with respect and opportunities. I'm kind of obsessed with this, but I feel like this transition is going to be very difficult because there's physical structures that have to be built, budgets that have to be established, way different than the budgets before, if I'm not mistaken. Mm-hmm. I mean, you can't expect people to govern without staff.
Right.
I mean, our dear friend Khan, who gets 1.5 staff people to be a state representative of stature and merit. So it is an opportunity. I think it's an opportunity around climate. I think it's around issues, all of it. And it's just being thoughtful about it. And what I like about the sort of outline that you have is it's looking to those connections. It's not just climate, dummy. Climate, dummy. Which is satisfying. It feels good, but doesn't move us forward.
Right.
I don't think even climate activists or a lot of other activists, can I have my tantrum around intersectionality as a word? Let's have a really complicated word to talk about how oppressions are interconnected and have to be understood together. Okay, now I've had my tantrum. But the idea is, identity politics definitely tended to have people pull toward their specific interest without understanding that you cannot deal with anyone's interest until you deal with all of them, because otherwise you're going to lose. Mm-hmm. If you're not together and you don't have an analysis, that's a long word too, but to win, we have to be together and we have to understand why we're together. Mm-hmm. and we have to be together. So
Yeah, and I really love that because I'm already seeing this play out in the way that people are running their campaign. So I have been actively collaborating with multiple people, even within my same district, who are running for office, because we know that 3 people can get elected. And it really works for us if we can all start collaborating ahead of time. And something
It's amazing.
it's very cool. If you told me a year or 2 ago that politics could be this collaborative, I would have looked at you like you were crazy.
Oh,
But
that kind of gives me chills because it's so, everything you've told me is just so different than the very negative viewpoint that I come to the table with.
Yeah, it's really exciting, and I mean there's certainly some cattiness around, like that is just still there. We're still in transition, right? There's still things that are changing, but I'm really seeing people respect the fact that every single candidate is coming with their own community backing. They're already in some ways community leaders in their own specific area. So whether or not any particular one of us gets elected, we are the people who are doing the work. And so knowing each other and networking with each other, understanding people's communities, moving in shared circles, learning about what's important to each of us, it only improves the city as a whole.
For sure.
I'm too excited to speak, which Patti knows is rare, because these are the ideas. So here we have a practice, something concrete that's being done that shows those of us who are noticing that it all is all connected. Obviously, there's patriarchy and there's capitalism always on top of everything, white skin privilege. And we don't succeed unless we all succeed.
Right.
The climate community cannot be successful unless it's part of a larger social movement. And people say that, but now what you're doing is actually the practice, is the ability to take that idea and give it reality and understand that in the long run you want to win, but in the long run what matters is we have progressive people who understand, who have created, I don't even want to use the word network, that's too mechanical a word. You're connected.
Yeah.
You're people who appreciate each other for who you are, value each other, and really want to work together.
Yeah.
Don't not have to work together. Want to work together.
Absolutely.
Oh, can I say the R word? Revolution. That's revolutionary.
It's revolutionary.
It's revolutionary.
It is.
Yeah.
Imagine being united instead of divided.
I love it.
I think the thing that stood out to me the most as you and I have talked, because we're friends, on the way through this campaign that you're running, was how I realized that you on some level were not looking at this as, oh, I can do some good if I get elected. You're looking at this as, I'm going to be doing good just by being in this race, because it seems really clear that your presence and your total focus on the issues that matter to you are kind of inching everybody up toward you, right? It's not a zero impact. I mean, that is forcing the other candidates to address what you're talking about. And that's fucking amazing. And you called it, like you were actually running as activism.
Yes. Yeah.
And I don't know if that's a thing you thought of or if it exists elsewhere in the world and I just hadn't heard of it before, but it's amazing.
Yeah.
And I think that idea has so much power. I mean, imagine other people in their late 20s through their 30s or whoever, honestly, but people who are younger, people who are millennials.
In their 80s?
If you want, if you want.
Just as once.
But like
It is a lot of
millennials, because, right, like I'm of the opinion that I'm middle-aged here. I'm 44. I no longer feel like what I'm working for is building my world. Like I'm trying to see what the people younger than me want and need and be able to facilitate that. So you're younger than me, but I go all the way down to my kids. My kids are 12 and 14. And so I'm looking at what needs to be done through all of those eyes.
Right.
And so I just think it's really important what you're doing.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for saying that. I really appreciate that acknowledgement a lot. And it means a lot to me that the campaign is also serving the people. And I mentioned that the voter education is part of that. And as I'm looking at a lot of the people running this year, and I think in local politics in general, there is this sense of like, I really, really deeply care about this particular issue. I have a lot of experience in this particular issue. And I am running as an activist in these issues, whether that's union or LGBTQ rights or climate activism. A lot of the local candidates have their thing, right? And we're all learning about each other's things. And last year, one of my favorite events that I went to was through an organization called Our Portland that got a bunch of progressive candidates together, and they were doing a bunch of breakout groups and panels and just learning from each other and kind of talking about, what do we want this to look like? What do we want Portland to look like? And at the very end, they had all of the candidates give a 1 minute, 15-second speech on an idea they wanted other candidates to steal. And it was beautiful.
Cool. That's a great.
Yeah, it was such a great prompt. The things that came out of that were really potent. I got to talk about the critical energy infrastructure hub in a group of 100 people, some of whom had never heard about it before. And I felt in that moment that I had done more activism work, more successful activism work in that 1 minute speech than I had done in my whole life. Oh my God. And so it was just really... It was really beautiful. It was a really beautiful moment to hear what everybody cared about and to be truly collaborative in that space with other people.
Now, you kind of alluded to all of the candidates bringing their backgrounds and their expertise to the table. But what we haven't done yet is to hear your background.
That's true.
Yeah. So I kind of wonder if we want to circle around to that and see, what it is that brought you to this point and what's driving you.
Yeah. So it's funny. I remember being in a meeting with some of the people at Extinction Rebellion, and the question was, when did you first know you were an activist? And I really sat down with that question, and I really didn't know the answer, because I feel like I came downloaded with that as a prime directive. Just, you must care about other people, and you must care about the environment, and you must care about all life and all beings. And so, okay. And I was born in Baker City, Oregon, and when I was about a year and a half, my parents moved to Utah, and I grew up in Utah, lived most of my life in Utah, went to the University of Utah. And just to really not fit in there, was still kind of discovering my queer identity, my non-binary identity, and eventually moved to Portland because I always knew that I wanted to go back to Oregon. I just felt like a lot of origin experience here. And so moved to Portland and just started getting integrated in the community. And part of the reason that I wanted to move here as well was I had this idea of Portland as this very ecologically friendly city. And I feel like, having lived here for 10 years now, I am honestly disappointed.
Oh my gosh, this sounds so familiar. I feel this so much.
Yeah. And so I started I had this deep, deep desire to get involved, but, I was working, I was trying to just stay alive for myself. And so really wasn't sure how to dig in. And I think it really was, I read the book All We Can Save, which is a collection of climate related essays from specifically women and non-binary people and youth, and talking about, all of these people working on the front lines of climate justice and what's being done and what's been successful. And what I really took away from that book was that change happens locally. Mm-hmm. Like, if you get a whole bunch of people in a town to go and protest a coal factory because it is actively giving those people's kids asthma, you have a significantly higher opportunity, a higher rate of success of shutting down that coal company if you get the community actively affected, involved. And so I took that and I was like, okay, where can I get involved in my local activist groups? So I found Extinction Rebellion PDX, I found 350 PDX, I've been working with the Portland Mutual Aid Network, and just really trying to say, like, okay, if everyone works locally to make these changes, then we can affect global change. But that's where it has to start. It has to start with those affected communities. And so that's been my background. And in terms of professionally, I've been on a pursuit of trying to find the most ethical way to make money, which is impossible, basically.
Yeah.
And I've gone from being a phlebotomist at a plasma donation center and then realizing that that company was a for-profit company and feeling really squicked out about that. And then I shifted into, I did some class action lawsuit documentation for a while, but then I started to realize that all of these banks were having these class action lawsuits for, you know, selling information and all of these things that banks do. And it's cheaper for them to go through a class action lawsuit than it is for them to change their policies. And I realized that even if I was working in class action lawsuit documentation and making sure people were getting compensated for that, it wasn't actually changing anything. It was really just making sure that lawyers get paid 30% of the settlements. Oh. And so I was like, okay, I can't work here anymore. And so I left there, did some like freelance writing and editing for a while. And then I worked for a tax company during 2020 because I didn't know what else to do. And eventually found my way to Scrap PDX, which is a creative reuse organization that does secondhand art supplies and party supplies and just all kinds of things and saves tens of thousands of pounds out of the landfill every month. And I was like, okay, I'm here, I'm in this. This is maybe where I'll stay forever. And I was doing that. I was working in the donations department for quite a while and helping local businesses reduce their waste and learn how to do that while also, you know, being able to offload their waste to us. And then also just learned so much about the nonprofit structure and how difficult and hard that is on employees and how unfairly compensation works and how hierarchy is still very much in play in those environments. And it's really a struggle when you have a board of directors that is not directly involved in the day-to-day running of an organization, and then they're the ones making decisions and they're just not hearing their employees. And so ultimately that became, unfortunately, a fairly toxic environment. And I deeply, deeply love Scrap, and I still definitely go there, but it was really hard for me to see the internal workings of nonprofit sector and just see that it was, I like to call nonprofits zombie capitalism, because there's no like CEO at the top who's talking about, you know, how much money they're making, but there's this sense of like they're still in the same rut as these other capitalist structures. They're still working on the same hierarchy. They're still working on not listening to their workers, and it's not their fault. Like they're trying to do this to get funding or they're trying to stay within budget, but it all comes back to just like how we're struggling to exist with money as an economy.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
So I ended up leaving that, and then I was like, okay, I actually, while I was still at Scrap, I was in the process of creating my own co-op. So I have a co-op called Ethical Yarn Community, and the whole idea is to have it be non-hierarchical. Everyone gets equal payouts, and we all contribute a certain number of hours a month to making the yarn and offering education to the community and just having fun together. Like I kind of like to think about it as reinstituting a guild sort of mentality and just really never making profit the primary driver of anything, and making sure that we're all having fun, we're all making art, and we're all happy with what we make. And if we get to sell it at the end, awesome, but that's never our primary driver. So, and then after leaving Scrap, I was like, okay, I think it's time to run for city council. So, and all of this taking place kind of simultaneously in a lot of ways with the Black Lives Matter movement, with the pro-Palestinian rallies, with a lot of social justice work. I was also doing a lot of volunteer work through Growing Gardens, another awesome local program. They have programs where low-income families, low-income schools, and the incarcerated community can learn gardening skills. And there was a time where my dad was incarcerated in Wyoming, and I felt like I couldn't help him directly, but I could help people like him. And so I decided to go into this Growing Gardens program and help at the Columbia River Correctional Facility to help inmates learn how to garden, because a lot of landscaping and gardening roles will not look at a felony, and they'll continue to hire people And honestly, that was one of the most humbling experiences of my life. Like, I spent 6 months there, and the only time I was ever disrespected, and this is an all male prison, and I am a non-binary person, fairly femme presenting. The only time I was ever disrespected was by a guard.
Oh, well, okay.
And honestly, I just saw so much of these people were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. They had incredible stories that were well worth listening to. And I will never forget the time that we were thinning radishes in the garden bed, and several of the inmates started crying because the radish babies were being pulled out of the ground.
I feel that. Oh, that is the hardest part of gardening, honestly.
Yeah. So all of these experiences were deeply, profoundly affected my life path and what I'm doing now. And I really just want to bring all of that to the forefront and show that someone who's empathetic, who cares, and, is deeply involved in the activist community can make change in government. Or know for sure that you can't, or try as hard as I can and see what happens.
Well, for one thing, we all tend to have this negative thought in our heads around what it means to be a politician. And I think for someone to come through and be as authentic and purposeful, and to have the resume that you have there that shows, no, you have actually gotten out there and done the damn thing.
Yeah.
Right? I think you had told me about NET, the neighborhood emergency teams. I don't know if you want to talk about that, but I thought that in particular is exactly what we need right now, right? We're here in this situation where we all feel separate from each other. We all feel like there's not enough. We all feel like we're scrabbling for what we need, when really none of that is true at all. And those emergency teams, the mutual aid situations, I just can't help but think that is the way we change our mindset about how we relate to one
So
another.
the whole mutual aid thing, I definitely want to go there.
Yeah, go there.
But I've been good for so long.
You have, Jerry.
So I'm old.
Yeah.
And I have lived an unusual life. And I am in many ways always an outsider. I look at pattern. I don't look at events. I look at patterns. So I see the world in a very different way. It is very hard for me to contain myself to tell you what an extraordinary thing you have done. And I see it in a very large pattern. I mean, it's not just an interesting accumulation of different things that you've done. Everything you've done, you have learned and incorporated into how you see the world. It might not always be clear to you. It's clear to me. That's my job, Andra. My job is to say, what you're doing is revolutionary. It's not a joke. It's revolutionary because if these things don't happen, nothing will. I mean, that's the sad thing. Everything is local. It's more than that. It's just one-on-one, how we treat each other, how we appreciate each other, how we support each other. We will survive or fail based on that and that only. Yeah. All the money in the world won't change it. Yeah. All the good ideas in the world won't change it. You work at Bark. Bark? Where do you work? Lark? Where do you work?
What?
Where do you volunteer?
Birch,
one of those. The beauties of aging. So you are working with people who are, I'm sure many of them houseless, people who do not suffer from food. What's that?
Well, so Birch serves, what their tagline is, serving the working poor. So they serve people who do not qualify for SNAP benefits, but still would classify themselves as struggling.
And how much have you learned in doing that?
Oh, a lot of things.
Yeah. But if you don't do something, you don't learn something. So this educator, John Dewey, that was his belief. If you want to learn about a fish, you cut one up. I mean, you don't study. If we don't, we are changed by experience, not by ideas, very much. Ideas are important, and they're a structure, but as artists, we all agree that art changes people in a different and more profound way, because it involves our whole being and not just the the reasoning software currently infected with malware that we think defines us, right? We're not rational beings. So. But to be as adventuresome as you have been, to do so many different things, from working in the dirt, working with wool, working with... It's like you have no idea what a resource you are. You have no idea. I do. I really do. And Patti knows I do. Yep. I'm not making this up. I want you to be represent me, but I don't live in your district.
I know.
but what I'm saying is, and in a different form, in lots of ways, but Confom is a very similar. She doesn't want to be a politician. Honestly, I've known her for 25 years. She does not want to be a politician. She does it because we're trying to save us all.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
the more that the progressive candidates coming in and influencing this process of this campaign, it's a great opportunity. It's going to be very difficult because most people don't have a structure to understand the truth of what you're saying. They can say, you did this, you did this, you did this. No. I'm there with you experiencing, working with prisoners. I could tell you stories. I won't because we're interviewing. But transformation is possible. I've just been hanging out with someone who lives here who is probably the leading reform prison warden of this generation. And his belief in inmates, his belief in what he did with it. So I don't know if Scared Straight's one of the programs that, and if he says, oh, no, I didn't do that. The inmates did that. I created a space that allowed them to do it. I didn't do it. Do not give me credit for it. Do not make me hurt you. I mean, he's adamant about it because people want to give him all the credit. He doesn't take it. So, and when I look at the common process you're in, the more that you deepen your understanding of it, and you've shown a really deep understanding of why that matters and how it works. If no one won, we would have changed the city. If no one won, we would have changed the city. So now we can talk about mutual aid, but I couldn't just... And believe me, I've done so many different things for so long around social justice and the understanding that you show of the process, trust me.
That's very sweet. Thank you.
The Yiddish word is kvel. Your heart beats fast. You're so proud.
Yeah, and I think it's very apt to bring in mutual aid into all of this because I didn't do all of this in a vacuum, right? Like I was really supported by my community. I had educational opportunities. I was able to get scholarships. I had a community supporting me through a lot of this. I live in a community household. We have 6 adults living together, and we're all tending the land and figuring out how to live in community and pooling income and doing all of these things. So those are the kinds of things that make this sort of thing possible. So I just want to acknowledge that it hasn't happened in a vacuum. There's been a lot
I want to acknowledge that I met you 16 months ago. Oh, you're not the same person. Well, you are the same person, but nor is she.
Yeah.
We've
all learned a lot.
And for me, as someone who clearly isn't declined, there's no way around it. What people like me need are people coming up behind to pick up those struggles and to do it in a way that we never understood. The complexity of your understanding of this process way beyond anything we had in the 60s, that I had in the 60s and 70s, and I thought I had my shit together. You know how that goes.
I think, can we say maybe that's evidence of, I don't know, progress?
We're getting somewhere.
Well, it is. And if you look at the general entropy and running down of things, it's difficult to feel progress. But what I think we need to really do is to be able to understand what is progressing, what is moving forward, and all the forces that militate against it. So I will probably come back to this theme over and over and over. Your experience and your understanding of it is necessary in this struggle.
Yeah, I really do think that systems level thought is really important, and I have a deep interest in that. And to go back to what you were saying about the neighborhood emergency teams as well, I'm deeply excited about that program. Actually, tomorrow I'm going to a citywide deployment exercise, and so I actually packed my net bag today. But just to give people a little bit of background on what the program is, so in other cities it's called the CERT program, CERT. It's called NET in Portland because there's a police organization called CERT in Portland, and so we can't call it that in Portland. But Neighborhood Emergency Team, NET is the acronym, and we have a really high number in comparison to other cities of civilians who've been trained in emergency techniques, so specifically search and rescue, triage, there's some first aid training, and there's radio training that all happens. In Portland, it's I think 28-hour training and a field exercise that has you go through just scenarios and learning how to be in community with people, knowing how to create leadership structures in an emergency. And one of the things I learned from that I found really interesting was that in the person who's a good leader in a blue skies situation where things are normal is not necessarily the good leader in an emergency situation.
Oh, that feels so important.
Yeah, and really the recognition of that was so interesting to me. And so in the net structure, the first person who gets there is the leader, until someone else that they know has more experience or they know has more know-how of the whole situation or is a paid Portland Bureau of Emergency Management employee shows up. And I think that that's really important because the first person there does have some understanding of the situation, especially as it relates to other emergency members who show up. But yeah, it's a really, really amazing program. All of the training is free through the city. And once you are a net, then you can get other training like wilderness first aid and lots and lots and lots of other advanced training. And it's just so exciting. And then the nets go out in the community and they volunteer at the parades and they they're out in the community. They're there, they're present. And then you get assigned to your individual neighborhood. So I'm in the South Burlingame neighborhood, and then we meet once a month and just talk about disaster training. And this is particularly important in Portland because, as most people know, we have the Cascadia earthquake that is due any time now. And something that I learned in the net training is that all of the fault lines on the Ring of Fire have had an earthquake in the last 50 years except ours.
Oh.
So we are very, very due for it. And so the more people we can get trained up to be emergency response members in their community, the more we see resilience. And that was something that I read about also in All We Can Save, is that in the wake of big disasters, the number one factor that determines how quickly a community bounces back is how well the neighbors know each other, how well they're trained to support each other, and how well they can collaborate and share resources, which in our Western civilization cultures is, we don't know our neighbors. We don't know who lives down the hall from us, who lives down the street from us. And so as I've been exploring mutual aid and everything, that's the biggest thing, is get to know your neighbors, get to know your neighbors, get to know your neighbors. And so I was like, okay, I don't know my neighbors. So what does it look like to invite people over to get together? And I was really nervous about this because I live in a fairly well-to-do community, and, living in a community household with a bunch of other queer people, we look a little different. And so, but I invited everyone on the whole block and also the net team to come over to our place and hang out with our bunny and do a little potluck. And we had like a neighborhood information table, and we just talked, and it was so fun. And then at the end, we did like a little open mic thing, and some people read essays, some people read poetry that they'd written, and then at the end we sang protest songs for the climate, and it was the best thing ever. And it was perfect. Like, all of my anxieties just disappeared. Like, no, these are great people. There are great people everywhere. We need to be treating all of our neighbors as resources and community members. So yeah,
maybe even speaking truth to goodness.
I don't know. It's
something like it.
So, I mean, that's the name of the podcast was, this podcast.
Oh, this
that
one.
We're recording right now.
What we're doing. Yeah.
Shit, that's
Welcome
really,
to season
that's
2,
really,
everyone.
That's really amazing. I got so excited now. So I think we can agree that we live in a negatively toned society. That there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of frustration, there's a lot of judgment. And we're quick to criticize people, but we're not quick to appreciate them like I did you. I spoke the truth to goodness. I'm a good boy. I do what I say I do.
Hey.
Because it's important, because you're not going to hear that message very often.
Right.
You're just not. Once you sort of catch the disease of speaking truth to goodness, you can't stop.
That's right.
Because you see the effect. I saw the effect that it had on you. And people do not get appreciated, and it doesn't have to be a big thing. It can be a small thing. I saw the way you helped her across the street. Thank you for doing that. Who is this? Oh, thank you.
It really does throw people for a loop, doesn't it?
So I think underneath everything that we've been talking about is we're a terrified nation.
Yeah.
People are afraid. They don't know what they're afraid of. They don't know. They just know they're afraid. And what's this tendency is to pull in when you're afraid and cut off. And isolation would be, I don't know, the worst thing you could do.
Beneficial to capitalism, though.
Yes.
Well, exactly. That's not why we do it.
That's why we've
Yeah.
been sort of conned into it.
So I think we're unaware of the importance of the little things. We're very aware of the importance of the crises facing us, the repression, all that stuff. But we need to be like good termites, gnawing away at the disease, and replacing it with, or like we're good germs and we want people to catch us.
Right.
Like
that.
So some of that, Patti, I think we've certainly talked about it. It's like the scale of what you do in some ways doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So my phrase for that is you move toward the good every day. If you move toward the good every day, you're great in my that's greatness. What do you think?
I think I'm appreciating so much, Andra, how your focus has been on people directly and the safety and the well-being of those people. But then I think for you to be running now is such a clear indication that you understand that connection of how working on a more individual level with people also has a connection to and the ability to scale to the political and the environmental, which is, where all of us individuals who relate to each other reside. And so one of the things you've talked a little bit about is bioregionalism and how, and really I see a big connection with the people part and what bioregionalism is. And I know that's a big force in your campaign. So I wondered if you wanted to elucidate a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I recently started a webinar class series on bioregionalism. That there's a global class that is meeting together, but then it's broken down into specific bioregions. So there's actually quite a few people in the class from the Cascadia bioregion, which is what ours is called. And then within that community, we even break it further down into subregions. And then we're like, okay, how can we meet in person to then do the things we're learning in the class? So there's this, even in the class itself, there's this really beautiful nested scale model based on geography, where we're all getting together in place to tend the land. So a bioregion is essentially an area of land where every species in that area has everything it needs to live. So everything is approximately self-contained within that region. And that makes the boundaries a little bit soft, but that's how it should be. Nothing is exactly like, here's a line in the sand of one bioregion to the next.
Wait, that's not how it is?
No. That's how a lot of dualists would like us to think about it. But so our region of Cascadia includes areas of Canada, the Pacific Northwest, Oregon, Washington, parts of Northern California, and Idaho. And it's thinking about how we're organized as species around watersheds and around geographic features, and how thinking about, okay, what is the heart, what is the lifeblood of this region? How can we support that? How can we regenerate? maybe some dead rivers or some, how can we do some reforesting? How can we be developing bioregional learning centers that are pulling together all of these disparate groups who are doing regenerative work, not just with the land, but also with culture and understanding and learning and education and even territorial governance. So we can have this really holistic look at what it means to regenerate ourselves in the land and on the land, with the land. And so there's many different bioregions across the globe. And so one of the things that I like to think about as I'm just living, being a human being, is to act local but think global. So really focusing on the ways that being really hyper local, being in my place, being in Portland, trying very hard not to do too much cross city travel and whatnot, is so important and crucial to how I'm interacting with the community, but then recognizing that that has an impact on how we're acting on a global level, and also recognizing and having empathy for all of these different things going on in the world. And one of the things that has been really striking to me as I've been going through this bioregionalism class is that each community is going to have unique challenges. So obviously in Florida and some of the bioregions over there, they have a lot of hurricanes. And so they want a lot of effort and money around building simulations around hurricanes. And how does that play out? And what safety measures do we need in place? And those simulations wouldn't be very useful here because we don't really get hurricanes. But here we want to simulate our earthquakes. We want to simulate our storms. And so, but there might be other regions of the globe that have already built similar simulations because they have similar climates. And so there's ways that even when we're being hyper local, we can use the knowledge resources of people across the globe, definitely giving them credit for all of their labor, but sharing that together and being in community together in a knowledge way rather than being so interconnected in a globalization kind of a way in terms of trade.
Yeah. And what comes obviously to my mind and learning from indigenous cultures and their practices.
Yes.
So this Eurocentric worldview is not helpful. It just really isn't. And so many good things, my daughter's a climate activist as well, are going on around the world that we need to be learning from and aren't. Because you can work on a small scale. It doesn't have to be a massive project. And indigenous communities and poor communities around the world understand that in a way that we don't, because we have all this privilege of and the world's connected. Everything is connected. Did you notice that?
Yes.
What do you mean? It turns out the land from which we draw our energy and all of our resources, we're connected to it? Huh?
No, we're not, but we should be.
Well, yeah.
There you
Because,
we are, even if we don't acknowledge it.
There you go.
So again, so I don't know how long ago it was. I was in Boston. I told you a lot of my stories, but I was in Jamaica Plain, staying with friends. I was up in the attic in a little dormer room. It was really hot up there, and I was reading a book by Paula Gunn Allen, one of the leading indigenous authors of the previous generation. And I came across, I was just reading, and I was kind of, and I just read this sentence: "The people and the land are one." And my head exploded. Literally exploded.
Not literally. Please,
I mean,
not literally.
just like splat all over. I had to recorrect my grammar. But there's something in me, as someone of indigenous heritage, not raised in relationship to that heritage, knows that truth. And that sentence was just like, I've never had another experience like it. So now I have carried that in varying degrees of consciousness with me for the last, just got to be 25 years ago at least. And I don't know how we get that knowledge back into the culture, is that we're not separate from the land. We're part of the land. And there is this very real way that we can't be healed until the land is healed.
Yeah, part of, I think one of the very first things, the very first webinar of this bioregionalism class, they said at one point The answer to where do I belong can be found in the question, where will I bury my bones?
Whoa, oh my gosh.
And that, I sobbed for the better part of 2 days after that, because I really had to sit down and think about, what does that mean? Where is that place for me? Am I doing that work? Would that place accept me? And just all of these things. So I've really also been feeling very open and expanded by that concept. Yeah. And it's interesting because the bioregional learning that I've been doing is very, very centered in Indigenous wisdom. And it's so tricky because as we're doing climate activism, as we're reconnecting with the land, and as Robin Wall Kimmerer would say, like, how do we become Indigenous to place? How do all of us become Indigenous to place? We don't want to put undue pressure on the Indigenous communities to come and save us, right? We want to be in harmony and be doing a lot of that work for ourselves. But given that the Indigenous communities and other global majority communities have been so ostracized from decision making, there's also this duty to reach out and make sure that they have the opportunity to be involved, that they're not required to be involved, but that they have the opportunity to be involved.
And there's a lot of resistance.
Yeah.
Tribal politics are very difficult to penetrate. There's no question about it.
Well, and it's complicated. And I've actually been reading this book called No Spiritual Surrender, Indigenous Anarchy in Defense of the Sacred. And it's amazing. And
there's a title. Can you say that again?
So, No Spiritual Surrender, Indigenous Anarchy in Defense of the Sacred. And it's, as a person going into politics, it's a tough read because it really criticizes a lot of what a government has done, of what even nonprofits have done, of what even activists have done, and just really dissecting all of the performance aspect of all of that. And so I don't at any point want to require that the Indigenous community participates in the government. Like, there's a lot of ways in which we are still very much occupying those lands, and the government is in a lot of ways illegitimate. And so recognizing that and also still wanting to make change is so hard. And there's just like a really profound balance of, can we make change? I think so. Can we exist in these current structures? Can we change these current structures? I hope so. I'm not sure. But I kind of have to see them from the inside to find out. And so that's kind of where I'm at, is like, this is my attempt to really understand it from the inside and say, is there saving this? Is there something like beneficial and pro-social about the structures of our current government? Or are we really looking at building parallel structures that pay no attention to them?
So have you spent any time with Con Baum?
I haven't spent time with them directly, no.
This must happen.
Agreed.
This must happen. Because she is another flavor of you, from a slightly different generation, in the middle of a much more, even than city council, politicized in a way. There's a structure she's dealing with. But she only agreed to become a candidate because of climate.
Yeah.
And she's sort of key in the... So this is my favorite T-shirt, which I just got. And you say, what does that say? It says Indigenous Resistance.
Beautiful, beautiful. Yeah.
So it's all complicated. I mean, there's so much, and I think the way this, connects to trying to how we are able to incorporate Indigenous knowledge in a respectful way. I mean, it's really complicated. And there's a lot of, and I think when I think about issues about race in particular, white people have no idea the effect of generations of oppression. Mm-hmm. Not something happened, get over it, and that's, white people would like people of color, BIPOC people, to get over it. Mm-hmm. Can't we? They're hunting. Can't we all just get along? No, we can't, because there's all this healing and all this repair that needs to be done. Yeah. And in general, I think white people have no idea of the depth of the pain that doesn't go away just because you say, yeah, I'm sorry that happened. No, that. Right. So the way in which you approach, and my experience over all these years is, you're going to get a lot of anger when you move into non-white communities, which I have been able to do, and I'm so grateful for. So there's just no appreciation of how complex it is to have generations of oppression.
Mm-hmm.
It's in your bones.
Yeah.
It might even be in your DNA for all I know.
Yeah,
I think
studies
so.
show.
So then I'll introduce that term, cultural humility.
Mm.
So there's a long story behind that, but the idea is if you enter into a different culture with humility and appreciation, be surprised how often you actually are accepted.
Mm-hmm.
And that started when I lived in Africa 60 years ago, and it's been going on ever since.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a very simple, it's kind of like some of the simple words we've been using, mutual respect.
Mm-hmm.
There has to be mutual respect.
Absolutely.
And if people have been damaged by the dominant society and all its oppressions, it's not easy to do that. So I go always knowing that I will be a symbol of something that I try not to be. White-skinned male privilege. Guess what? I'm a white-skinned male. And I was raised not in relationship to my indigenous heritage. I was raised in relationship to my white-skin privilege.
Right. Yeah.
So it feels, we're in such a crisis, it feels like we've got to fix this now.
Mm-hmm.
These things are not fixable in the short run.
Right.
They're only fixable over time.
Mm-hmm.
There has to be patience. And so what am I most proud of in the last 6 months? Coining the phrase, the fierce urgency of the long haul. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Of course there's the urgency of now.
Right.
But if the work that needs to happen for change to happen is not happening
Yeah.
in the short range.
Right.
So we have to be able to do both.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really believe that. And in learning about bioregionalism, they're talking about this is 500-year work.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So this is not something that gets done overnight. This is really putting in the effort to be here with the land and to do this regenerative labor with the land. But I also think it's really important to recognize that the most recent statistics that I've been looking at says that in order to keep the global south livable, we need to stay under 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming. And to do that, rich countries need to cut their emissions to zero by 2030, which we're in 2024, and that seems highly unlikely. And so I'm really looking at, okay, yes, we need to be doing this 500-year work. That's very important, and that's a very important perspective to keep in mind. But also, we need to be prepared for mass amounts of climate refugees and mass amounts of reparation for all of the damage that the global north countries, who are contributing 92% of the carbon overshoot, are doing. So as we're creating policies and as we're building mutual aid structures and as we're doing intersectional justice and making sure we have healthcare for all and we're caring for the people and we have education and all of these things, we not only need to do that for our people, but also for all of the people who will be coming in to our communities, and we need to be treating them with love and care and respect. And so what our short-term work is for me is to really be developing that empathy for other people, for other beings, for all of this influx that we're going to see, and to really celebrate that and grieve that together. Because that's going to be the work of the next 5 to 10 years is really looking at mass migrations and really, really deep cultural change.
One of the people who lives here did research on the impact of migration because of climate change for the Department of Defense in 1997.
Yeah, these things, it's not like it's not known. It's just been ignored because it doesn't turn a profit.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's just interesting that they were acknowledging 25 years ago that this was going to happen.
Yeah.
And there's been absolutely no movement
Right.
to deal with that reality. And the human cost, obviously, is the greatest cost. And we don't seem to be dealing with immigration well right now.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
And you know what I asked for my 80th birthday?
What?
50 more years.
All right. There you go.
50 more. I just need 50 more years, right?
Sounds about right.
Got-
Yeah.
Probably not going to get it. Where do you register? You know, you could give me a week. You could give me a week. We can work it out.
Hey,
But
that's a good idea.
so
Yeah.
you're right. I think that's the tension. There's a reality. Is what's the title of this podcast? Finding joy and purpose on a burning planet. It's a burning planet, ladies and gentlemen, and that's urgent.
Right.
And yet we can't. We have to do enough self-healing.
Right.
To be able to understand the complexity of the work we're doing and do it better, right? So I think Extinction Rebellion is at least willing to have the conversation. I'm not sure how, and I haven't been able to participate because of all my limitations, but we're trying.
Yeah.
We're really trying.
Wow.
And I just feel we're all, I mean, speaking personally, using I statements, I'm confused. I think we're all confused because the problem is so complicated.
Sure.
There is
Yeah.
no single solution. Oh, if we just did this, then.
Right.
No, it's much more complicated. And
But
we
si-
never give up. That's what's
Right.
lovely about
Yeah.
us.
Right. We never give up.
We never give up.
But I tend to, maybe it's oversimplification, but I always tend to think if we, as a cultural value that we're building now, start to become in a place where what we care about is increasing well-being for as many people as possible, because that inherently has a climate aspect to it, obviously.
Absolutely.
And if that's what we cared about, all of us, individually, collectively, our decisions would be based on that.
Yeah.
And so us knowing how to access good information and connect with real people who give a damn is probably the place to start building that cultural consciousness.
And they're out there.
They are. They're
Absolutely.
sitting
They're
right here. Like
literally
you said,
every-
speaking truth to goodness, the tagline is finding joy and purpose on a burning planet. That's what Andra's doing.
Yeah, I know. That's the purpose of this whole thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and as you're talking about just that deep community care for not only other human beings, but also the land and all of the beings on it and supported by it, that really is a key component of the degrowth idea of really bringing in these ideas of animacy, of being the land, not there's nature and then there's me, but I am nature.
Yes. My gosh.
And then also really looking critically about, okay, we've been determining our metrics of success by GDP and profits, and that doesn't actually measure any of the things we care about, like family or love or fulfillment or satisfaction or mental health or any of these things, right? And so as they're looking at there's lots of different indicators that are being thrown out there by economists and other people who are looking at, okay, actually we don't need as much GDP to be happy as we thought. And so if that is true and we start maybe repurposing military spending toward education, toward healthcare, toward
I think you solved it.
right, toward actual well-being, then we can start generating this community care. And when people have more leisure time, when they don't have to outsource services so much because they have more time, they're spending more time with their community, they will naturally care for the land. That has just been proven over and over and over again by other countries who have lower GDPs than us and are doing better in all of these other indicators,
Right.
is that when they have more free time, when there's a shorter work week, when there's not this emphasis on consumption and propping up these big businesses, that those people start to care for the land if they haven't been actively caring for the land already.
So you're saying we go ahead and take care of each other and it actually works itself out.
Yes.
So you're saying we need to be building adaptable systems that reduce our impact, our harmful impact on each other and the planet. And we're there. I mean, it's not that simple, but it is.
Yeah. And I mean, there's a lot of indications that there is a big consciousness movement toward all of these things, and that the minority of people are people who are still engrossed in this extractive capitalism and these extractive economies. And so we're in the moment, right? We're in
Yes.
this really big transitional moment. And I know that we've been talking really globally and systemically about all of this, but bringing it to the city, I mean, I think that, all of these things, it's micro and macro, right? And in Portland, we're also in this big transition moment. And it's so exciting to be in this time, in this place. And as much as I have a lot of anger and a lot of frustration at the ways that obviously all of the economic and imperial and colonial practices have got us into this place, after you get through and sort of accept that anger, there is an honor in being the group of people who might help to move forward and to be more caring and more empathetic and return to the old ways in new ways. And
Almost like a bridge.
yes, yeah, being the bridge and connecting those pieces together. So I really think there is an honor. And I think that getting to that place of honor after the experience of anger really requires the acceptance of how bad it is. You have to be and sit with the grief of it all. And you have to even sit with the very real possibility that we might not be able to fix this. And I think really being there and really sitting with that and saying, if we cannot fix this, what kind of a person do I want to be?
That's interesting. I think that's come up for us. I choose to live the way I choose to live. We either make it or we don't. But we have, again, that sort of honor, but also that joy. And I write about everything somewhere. Somewhere the idea is the edge is dangerous, the edge is scary, the edge is where all the really great people are. So we get to hang out together.
All good, all good.
Direct action.
It doesn't work.
I am not defeated.
Oh no, what are you doing? That was a phone getting stuck in the fridge.
Yeah, well, never mind. Yeah. So it's exciting. It's exciting. I mean, to sit down and have this conversation is almost unimaginable.
Almost.
Do you know
But
what
here
I
we
mean?
are. It's
because
real.
all of
I
us
promise.
are in a process of change. I mean, even the old guys are changing. Understanding, learning a lot. I learned a lot from this conversation. Because it puts together my intuitive thinking, which is what I function off of, and my, 60 years of social justice activist. These things all fit together.
They do.
And that you are doing is, she's very advanced. She's a young person, and she's already smarter than I am.
Yeah. Andrew goes by they, them pronouns.
They, I'm sorry, I keep forgetting. They is a hard one for me. So, I appreciate you.
I do accept you, yeah.
But it's that cultural humility. It's like,
I actually have a chapbook of poetry called "You Are an Ambiguous Pronoun."
Oh, cool.
I love that.
Yeah, it's fun. Good stuff.
God, so much to learn.
Always, yeah.
Well, so you were mentioning bringing it back to the city and what it is like environmentally that we're actually facing here right in the city. So we've kind of delved into the heart within all of us and our need to connect to each other on a very tangible food and water for everyone kind of level. And we've sort of zoomed out and looked at what it might look like for us to focus more on the land and how our geography impacts us and our relationships to each other. But those things kind of come together in the city. And so when you think about the environmental issues impacting Portlanders specifically, what areas do you want to focus on in your campaign and then potentially also as a city council member?
Yeah, so The Critical Energy Infrastructure Hub, which I briefly mentioned earlier on, is a area in North Portland that houses over 90% of our oil storage and also all of the jet fuel used at PDX. And it's located in the liquefaction zone right next to the Willamette River. And so in the event of the earthquake, which we're definitely due for, a lot of those oil tanks would break open and spill directly into the Willamette River, and it would constitute the biggest U.S. oil spill to date. And honestly, I do not want Portland to be on the map for that reason at all. So when I heard about this, it was devastating. And part of it is that these oil tank farms were built before we really had the seismic data about what was possible. But as I went to a press conference on the CEI Hub and some of the issues there recently, and one of the things that the panelists said was, this is not just bad soil that these are built on, it is our worst soil. And part of that goes back to, honestly, not having respect for the indigenous lifeways, because a lot of the biodiversity and the sort of wetland style of the rivers was taken away and honestly terraformed to deepen shipping lanes, which increased profits. And so as we brought in soils to fill out certain banks of the area that is in that industrial tank farm over there, that soil is still really susceptible to liquefaction in the event of an earthquake. And I also recently learned in the event of a flood, which we've been having more and more problems with. So, and then also it's highly explosive materials. So it's right next to Forest Park. And so if for whatever reason that were to catch fire, it's very likely that would also go toward the CEI Hub. And yeah.
Like a tinderbox.
Yes.
Just like matches sitting right there next to it.
Yeah. It's really dangerous, and the tanks haven't been seismically retrofitted after learning about this. And there was a big movement, I believe in 2021, with a bunch of environmental activists in the city, with neighborhood associations, with the indigenous tribes, to get city council to deny the land use permit for the CEI Hub. And they did initially, but then the Zenith Energy, which is one of the companies in the CEI Hub, did some illegal lobbying, which the city auditor has recently come out and confirmed that illegal lobbying occurred to give them the land use permit back. And so we're still honestly in much the same situation, even though Zenith Energy and other oil companies over there are saying they're going to shift to natural gas. That's also just kind of a misnomer, because natural gas still pollutes the environment. It's still explosive. It still causes a lot of issues. You still have to build these pipelines that are going through the land and causing harm. So we really need to be, at the very minimum, seismically retrofitting these facilities. We need to be looking at dispersing the oil throughout the state, and ideally phasing out fossil fuels altogether.
Sure.
So that's the biggest issue. That is what I said when they asked me at our Portland event, like, what idea do you want other candidates to steal? And the great news is that there are a lot of candidates who are talking about that issue, who care about that issue, who are knowledgeable about that issue, so that no matter who gets elected, they know what's going on, which is really important.
Yes, that's never happened before.
Right, exactly. And so, yeah, and then additionally, I've recently learned that there's some great Rumble on the River events that go on with the activist community in Portland. And at one of those, they talked about that. So I knew about the oil tank farms, but what I didn't know is that there are over 70 toxic inhalant facilities along the Willamette River in the proximity of Portland, such that in the event of an earthquake, if those break open, they emit lethal gas. So, yeah. Yeah. And depending on which way the wind is blowing, it could cause a huge number of fatalities. And the really scary thing to me is that there's no way to tell within the first few hours of exposure whether you have fatal symptoms or whether you have symptoms that are temporary. And so you can't really treat anybody. And in the event of an earthquake, it's going to be very difficult for any kind of emergency response teams to get out to you. And they'd have to do some kind of measurement to even see which chemicals you're dealing with. And all of these chemical facilities are very confidential. So they don't have a lot of information about which chemicals are being housed, only that they are toxic. And to top it all off, our emergency response team, our first responders, are only trained to handle one type of toxic chemical at a time. And in this situation, multiple chemicals would be in play. And so some chemicals need to be resolved with water, and some of them, if you add water, then it causes a bigger problem. And they won't know which chemicals are in play. They won't know how to deal with multiple chemicals at the same time, and the emergency response team will not be able to reach people in time to get care. And so that's really devastating. There's almost nothing we can do except regulating these companies. And the best thing that I've heard of that can help with both the CEI hub issues and with these toxic inhalant facilities is to do risk bonding. So basically what that is these companies would essentially be charged money given that a disaster could happen, and that they need to be retrofitting their facilities and if they do, then they don't have to pay these risk bonds. But in the meantime, if a disaster occurs while they're in this risk bond period, then they are responsible for paying for all of the damages, because right now that would all come out of taxpayer pocket.
Okay, so this means we're prioritizing these poison companies to protect their proprietary recipes for the poison they make being stored in the city in which we all live in, when it's a chemical that can become airborne.
Yeah.
And we're still letting them be proprietary about that because of profit.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just want to be really clear about when we talk about we want to see people over profits be the priority, it's stuff like that.
Yeah.
Because we are protecting the pockets of people who already have overflowing pockets when they're putting the people with so much less in danger.
Yeah. And something that I feel really strongly about in all of that is we need to obviously be educating ourselves. We need to be putting pressure on these companies. We need to be removing some of the confidentiality, like you said. But as I'm reading the Portland City Charter and all of the reforms and all of the changes that have been done, and I'm reading the list of powers that a city government has, one of the things on that list is the handling of hazardous materials. And so for me, nothing is more representative of a failure of our current city government than the fact that we are at so much risk of this oil tank farm and these toxic inhalant facilities. That is a huge responsibility of the city council that has just been overlooked or been sidelined or backburnered, or and has outright betrayed the community. Exactly. And it's devastating. And so for me, the city council, based on the charter, they're responsible for a lot of the infrastructure, for the roads, for, like I said, the hazardous materials, the streets. There's a lot of infrastructure type safety, things like that. But yeah, the hazardous materials, it needs to come into play. That's our job. We're supposed to keep Portland safe. And, we can talk about, police all day long, but that's not going to protect us from all of these facilities if and when there's an earthquake.
It feels embarrassing that we've missed the mark so far in terms of what the responsibility of local government is, right? It's to protect us.
Yeah.
And clearly we haven't been protected.
No.
And the land hasn't been protected.
We have a much more antagonistic relationship to those structures.
Yeah.
When you're right, they should be making us feel safe.
Yeah, that hasn't happened recently.
No. Things to think about.
Yeah.
Well, I have a lot of hope. Oh my God, it's going to be chaos. This changing of form of government. It's 2 years of chaos. That's what I predict. It's inevitable. You take this bureaucratic structure and try to deconstruct it and find a place for all these new. It's going to be complicated, and there's going to be the resistance from the business community that was there all along. And part of their resistance is because it's actually going to cost money to set up the government in a way that it actually serves people. And I have people here who like the idea but don't like the cost of it. So, yeah, they talk about it. It's great to be born in interesting times. My case, it may be the other way around, to die in interesting times. You just never know. No time soon. No time soon.
Okay, good. Glad to hear it.
But it's like, once you sit down and think about it, some things are, in my mind, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that we're not protecting our citizens. And if that's not the job of local government, or even the state government, right? I mean, now we're talking about a larger sort of disease, but...
Yeah, it was really interesting because even at the Rumble at the River Forum where they were talking about these toxic inhalant facilities, and they did all of these simulations of exactly how many people they thought would die if the wind was blowing in this direction or if the wind was blowing in that direction. And I had to stop them and ask, like, okay, I hear about these human impacts. What about the impacts to the wildlife? What about the impacts to the land? And they're like, well... it would be worse. We don't know how much worse, but it would be worse than it is for humans. And I don't know, I think that's really indicative of, as city council people, we're not just here for human citizens and human beings, but we're here for every constituent, and I mean every being and every plant in the city. And honestly, beyond the city, in the ways that our city interacts with other cities and other counties and other states and even other countries. So yeah, I think that that's a really important thing to keep in mind as well.
So I wanted to circle back kind of to you in particular. So I know we started with your background, what brought you to this point of deciding to run. And I think you've done a really good job of explaining why. And it's really clear.
It's really compelling.
Right?
Oh, thank you.
It is. It's really compelling.
I mean, if you had a campaign to donate to, I would.
Right.
Well, so that's where I want to
another
circle
question.
back to. So you're doing something that I don't know if I've ever heard of. You're running your campaign in a super unique way, and I think it's really important for the listeners to understand what you're doing and why. So if you could kind of share that and layer that on top of what we already know about you and where your focus is, where your heart is as you take this step.
Yeah, so as I was really sitting down with myself and learning about what it means to run for government and what's required and all of the campaign expenses, I knew ahead of time that running, especially a climate campaign, I did not want to be doing things that were not eco-friendly. So I didn't want to be printing out mass materials. I didn't want plastic-coated yard signs. I didn't want to be paying marketing companies that were based outside of Portland or to be paying into big tech as much as I could. So I really sat down and I'm like, okay, what do I want to spend money on? And the answer was almost nothing. I am an artist and I have designed websites before, so I could do that on my own. And I was able to take some time off work so that I could be my own campaign manager, my own treasurer, and do all my paperwork. And I have lots of people in my community who showed up to volunteer and help me. And so as I was really looking at all of the numbers, I was like, I can do this for less than $1,000. And so as a result, that's what I'm running on. I'm not asking people for donations. It doesn't feel good for me to ask for money from people who have not enough to eat or not enough to pay their rent. I would rather them, if they have extra money, to donate to a local charity or a local mutual aid fund than to give it to me as a candidate. I feel like that's money better spent. And so, yeah, my understanding is that of the candidates declared right now, I'm the only one running in that way. And I think that that's very unique. And there are a lot of people running through this small donors election program, which is a very cool program, and it helps keep big business out of politics. It allows for people to match funds 9-to-1 with the city. So if you donate $5 to a candidate, then the city will match $45. So $5 turns into $50, and that is true up to $20 from an individual person, which is great. But in order to get certified through that program, in order to actually start getting those matching funds, you have to receive at least 250 donations from unique individuals. And I was really looking at it, and I'm like, okay, if 250 people donate $5 to my campaign, that's already more than I anticipate spending. That's over $1,200. And I don't know what I would spend the money on. And I even asked people, like, what am I supposed to spend the money on? And the answers I've gotten have not been great. I mean, it's like you need to hire campaign staff, or you need to pay for voter data, which I'm like, okay, I'm sorry, but if you are signing up to register to vote, you maybe do not realize that your voter data is being stored in a database that then politicians can pay for. It's like $750 to pay for all of this voter data that has your address and sometimes your phone number and maybe even your email in it. And I just don't feel good about using that personal information. It's not mine, and I don't want to pay for it. Like, it's more than I want to spend in my entire campaign just to buy access to the voter data. So,
ooh, I did not know that.
Yeah, it's really weird. And people are like, oh, but you can do this with it, and you can do that with it. I'm like, that's not better. So I'm not asking for donations. I am funding my own campaign. I want to show that that you don't need money to run for politics. I want to show that ranked choice voting works, that it allows for people like me to get into office or to succeed in any kind of way, really. And that because we have 3 counselors from the districts, I have a better chance of running without money. And a lot of other people have told me, you can't possibly do this. You would make history if you do this. I'm like, okay, well, there's really no other way to run, right?
Let's make history
Let's
then.
make history, yeah. So, yeah, and we'll see how it goes. I mean, it's different. And so the best way people can help me is word of mouth. I'm running social media campaigns. I'm out in the community. I'm at protests. I'm at activist groups. I'm involved. I'm attending events. So that's really what I'm doing. That's my campaign. I don't want to be a person who's pushy, who bothers people, who calls you on the phone and says, please, please, please donate $20 or we're not going to save the climate. Like, no, that's not the way. So, yeah, I'm just a human being. I trust our voter pamphlet also.
Yes.
We have the voter pamphlet is not something that every city has, every county has. And so I really, as a voter, I would rather not really hear anything from political candidates and just read their blurb and able to go and visit their website and make my own decision, because everything from billboards to plastic-coated yard signs to TV ads, it is not authentic. It's not real. It's not like, it might not even be true. And so what does it look like to just let the candidates speak in the same way with the same number of words as any other candidate for the same amount of money? It just feels like a no-brainer to me.
Right. I mean, truly, why should money influence our decisions in that way?
Yeah.
Because this is capitalism, dummy.
Yeah.
If it's not making money for somebody, what good is it? Really?
That seems to be the way it's thought of, and that has never made sense to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Old people repeat themselves, but you've won in a sense, you've won the victory already, because you've gone through the process of thinking these things through in a comprehensive, deep way, and not just default setting to what's done or isn't done, and understanding that process in some ways is part of that whole set of core values that you've sort of navigated over the last 10, 15 years of your life. So that's the way I feel about our podcast. If 3 dogs and a mouse listen to it, we've made a contribution, right? Those 3 cats and that mouse are going to get along.
There you go.
They didn't before our podcast. They fought. Now they're working together against dogs. No. That's the wrong way to go.
Or at least they're seeing the goodness in each other.
They're seeing and in dogs. So it's But I do repeat myself, but I just think some of this thinking is so unusual that you almost have to repeat it. I'm so hopeful that you are, and you share something in a sense with Khan. Khan doesn't want to be a politician. That should be a requirement to be a politician.
Agree. Strong
right?
agree.
And Khan does take no corporate, no PAC. And I think any money that she gets actually goes into community organizing, because she is so tied in such a beautiful way. And so there's little healthy pockets in the abscess of politics. I just made that up right here.
It's a good one. It's very visceral.
So I think in different ways, and I actually give her more credit than we deserve by far, of rethinking how we imagine resistance, how we imagine collaboration. I mean, there's so many things that you've done that have involved collaborations of different kinds, right? And from each of those experiences, you learn something more, right? And it's so exciting to think of if we had a cadre of folks like you, and we do, but I actually do think you're more thoughtful about these things than pretty much anyone I know.
Agreed.
Yeah?
Well,
Yeah.
And backed up with these chunks of experience, both, economic survival, but also in mutual aid stuff, in sort of climate resistance, in, I'm sure, things in the gender community, and it's a good life.
Oh, Jerry, are you
It's a
saying
good
that
life.
Andra is very intersectional?
No, that's a stitch too far.
Interconnected.
Well, even
That's more syllables.
But it's still abstract. It's like look. I work with workers all my life.
Yeah.
If I say intersectional, switch goes off, right? But no, you got me. You did this again.
Oh,
You
I know.
Did this on purpose.
We've fought about this word before.
It's like we need, and so this is a whole other conversation, not for now, but what is the language that we need to speak to people?
Yeah.
What is the language that translates our somewhat complicated ideas into language, and the practice of living it allows us to do that. But it's a big problem.
Yeah.
Abstract language, I do have an issue with it.
Yeah. I had this really interesting experience just a couple days ago. I was doing an interview for a possible union endorsement, which I have a lot to say about endorsements. And I probably won't get that one because I'm not a quote-unquote viable candidate, because I'm not raising enough money to show that I am viable. But, whatever. Anyway, that aside, having this interview, and it's very clear that I'm a bit more radical than the interviewer, and that's making them uncomfortable. But as we start talking about the climate crisis, this woman says to me, yeah, the climate crisis is the reason that my kids aren't having kids. And I could see that she was very emotionally affected by that. And so I said, yeah, I have had to sit down with my wife and say, do we want to have kids? Do we want to do this? Is it right? Is it moral to bring a child into this world knowing that we might be on the verge of collapse? And I did a very similar thing that I talked about earlier in terms of saying, like, okay, I'm going to imagine myself in my kids' perspective, knowing that my parents knew that collapse was imminent. And how do I feel knowing that? How do I feel learning about that? And there is that process of anger. There is that process of grief, but there is that honor duty of being, yes, the people who could live better. There's this sliver of hope, this sliver of chance. And just in talking about that with this woman at this union endorsement interview, she started crying. Aww. And I was so deeply moved. We were both moved together, and there was a way that we could connect, even though so much of our other language was not resonating with each other, and there were so many things that were not hitting. Like, she could see the thought that had gone into me thinking about this, and what it means to try to continue, and what it means to have faith in humanity, and what it means to be trying to get back to the land. And it was really beautiful. It was this really profound moment of that that interview overall did not go well, but she was moved, and that's what mattered.
Absolutely.
It is what matters. Well, and isn't that, I've always thought that point about our children is one we can get together around. Because we do all want a good future life for our children.
No.
What?
So in Glasgow Climate Conference a couple of years ago, the sign is, Mr. CEO, do you have children? Do you like your children?
Yeah.
Some people are conscious actors in destroying the hope of their children and their children's children. That's psychotic.
No, that's privilege that doesn't realize, or that can only see that their children will be fine because they've got piles of money in the bank. But they won't be fine,
No,
but that's how they think of it.
And even if they were fine, it wouldn't be fine. Do you know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
But it's just, I do not understand. And it's this point of how consequences play no role in decision-making in corporate structures. I mean...
Not when everything's focused on fourth quarter earnings.
Yeah. Yeah.
That cycle's too quick to see the reality.
Oh, God. You must win.
I agree.
We could move, and then we could vote.
Quick, get over to District 4.
Well, I do want to say that there are a lot of other candidates running who are doing really, really good work. I would say of the people that I've been collaborating with, Timur Ender in District 1, Candace Avalos has also been doing a lot of really wonderful work in District 1. District 2, I'm really excited about Jennifer Park. And District 3 has many amazing candidates, Angelita Murillo, and gosh, I'm like blanking on all of the names. But point being, I really do think that this Portland transition, this new government structure, has allowed for a lot of unique people to come and run for office. So we have a lot of good options. And yeah, even in my district, I feel like there's quite a few people I can stand behind. So
and those connections, regardless of who wins, who, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the connections stay.
And I would say, based on having done this for a long time, those connections are so much more important than you know they are.
Mm-hmm.
They're the difference between surviving and not surviving.
You may not even yet know what is going to come of the cohort of city council candidates right now.
Yeah. I'm really looking forward to that. We're already starting to collaborate and bring testimony to the current city councilors and say like, hey, here's some things that we would like to do when we get into office. Do you want to do it first?
Awesome. Yeah.
Here's all of the work. We've already done it for you.
Here's some good ideas. Get started.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's been great.
Are they going to do? How many of them are going to be running?
Of the current city council members, so 3 of them are running for mayor, and 1 of them is running for city council in District 2. So all of them are running. Ted Wheeler is not running.
3 of them are out of the mix, though, because one of them may or may not be mayor.
Right.
But they are no longer part of this process.
Yes.
And because we're going to city manager model, their power becomes way less than it was.
So, Andrew, you kind of teased this a minute ago, but coming up in our series here, we're going to have Durrell Kinsey Bey, who is a mayoral candidate. Andra has also invited in Timur Ender from District 1 and Chris Flanary, who is another non-binary candidate, right?
Yes.
And they are from District 3. And then we'll finish it out with District 2's Jennifer Park. So hopefully that'll give a nice little sampling of somebody from every district that I assume is somewhat in our wavelength of thinking about what the future could and should look like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, these have been really amazing collaborators so far that I've been working with, so I'm really excited to hear them share their stories.
Nice. I'm excited too.
Our experience has been, as the conversation continues, it deepens.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So this is like a first pancake.
That's right.
It's a good pancake.
Oh yeah, not like a first
healthy
pancake.
Not like a first pancake, but an early generation of pancake.
Well, there you go.
But I just think for you had a chance to lay out this overall structure, and now you can go deeper into these things so many of which need to be gone into. So we laid, I think, a really good groundwork for the ongoing conversation, and I, for one, am quite grateful.
Same. Thank you for bringing your goodness to share here.
Thank you both so much. I feel a lot of gratitude in this room. So thank you. Thank you.
Is there any final things you want to say?
No, I think just mostly that there is hope in acceptance. There is love in grief, and there is a future, whether it's here with this planet or somewhere else. We've got a chance, and we should love that chance.
I'm in.
Let's do it.
Okay. All right. I think we did it.
Is that a wrap?
Oh my God, we did it. That was so good.
My phone doesn't ring twice in a week. I should probably take it out of the refrigerator.
Jerry, I kind of think you're lying. I think it's rang almost every time we've recorded. Come on now. Come on now.
You are so bad.
Yes, I am.
And it's reflected in the behavior of your children.
I know, he's getting dirty now.
High five. You're doing awesome stuff. You both are. This is very cool.
Oh my gosh, you've just talked that whole time about all the awesome stuff you're doing. So
I'm like, all like,
that was amazing. By the way, did you hear yourself? I don't know if you did. You probably just like went through it. So when you hear it back, you're going to be like, oh my God, I'm so fucking awesome.
Yeah, there were definitely moments that was like, what is speaking through us right now? It's big.
Yes.
Big.
But in case it's not obvious, I adore her children.
Yeah. I adore them too.
Yeah.
Thank you for tuning in to today's discussion with Andra Vltavín. As we wrap up, we reflect on the powerful blend of strategy and tactics Andra shared, reminding us that the human connection to our activism is what truly transforms. It's been an enlightening session discussing how we can effectively challenge the norms and redefine our interactions for a sustainable future. Don't forget to engage with us through likes, comments, and by sharing this episode. Join us next time as we continue to explore the innovative paths our candidates are forging toward a just and equitable Portland.